Let me tell you about my city. It's wild gritty.
And welcome into the changeup on WOAY Sports. Alongside Tom Beal, I'm Matt Digby. Tom, it's been another great week at local sports here in Southern West Virginia. A lot of college football action. You had a chance to experience the WVU game last week, the win over Youngstown State.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. It wasn't quite sold out. I thought maybe they would have packed it up completely. Just a few corners in the upper deck that were empty, but really good turnout from the fans. Ended up being a good win for the team despite some struggles early on with the defense, especially in the first half. Youngstown State actually had a lead at one point, and then Skylar Howard had to step up, and he played one heck of a game, and eventually they pulled away with it. So it was fun.
So college football definitely well underway, but a lot of other sports going on in Southern West Virginia, notably tennis. The Greenbrier Champions Tennis Classic is back for another year down at America's Resort in White Sulphur Springs. And joining us now on the phone is our good friend, the Greenbrier's Director of Sports Public Relations, Cam Huffman. Cam, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good. First off, weekend finally here. A lot of anticipation for another Champions Tennis Classic. How have the emotions been the first few days this week now that it's finally here?
Yeah, it's exciting for sure. We always look forward to this event, and probably even more so this year with adding the women to the event. That's going to be a spectacular weekend, and we're excited. I heard you guys talking WVU football leading in. We're excited that we have it in an off week because in the past we've competed with WVU football a little bit, which has made it difficult. So we were able to work out the schedule a little bit better this weekend, and we're still competing with college football, but at least we're not competing with the Mountaineers. So we're really excited about the weekend ahead.
Yeah, Cam, that timing really worked out great for you guys. And so, for people who maybe don't know, haven't been out there before, can you just kind of talk about what the facilities are like here for the tennis court? Everyone knows, you guys have outstanding golf courses, but what's the tennis facility like for those who don't know?
Yeah, tennis at the Greenbrier actually dates back further than golf does. Tennis was kind of the first thing that was really popular at the Greenbrier, and that was kind of the goal of this Greenbrier Champions Tennis Classic when we started 5 years ago, was to try to bring back that tennis tradition a little bit and make it known that the tradition that is there. And we had 5 outdoor courts and 4 indoor courts that we have been there for a long time. And we've also built the new center court at Creekside, which opened last summer, 2,500 seat stadium, where the event will be played this weekend. Fingers crossed if we don't have rain. So it's a beautiful venue. It's modeled after the center court at the U.S. Open. It's basically just a scaled down, a little bit smaller version of it. And it now has the exact same court that they have at the U.S. Open as well. It was a clay court, but after the floods damaged the clay, we made the decision to convert it into a hard court exactly like they have at the U.S. Open. And that court got finished this week, and it's up and ready to go. So we're really excited to host an event inside it.
Yeah, speaking of the weather, we are expecting much nicer conditions than we've had for the past few tennis events. How big do you think that will be in terms of being able to draw fans out both Saturday and Sunday, be able to see the 4 stars, Pete Sampras, John McEnroe, Venus Williams, and Madison Keys?
Yeah, the good weather would help tremendously. We're just really keeping our fingers crossed because we've only been able to play about a set of tennis inside the center court at Creekside when it's open. It seems like every time we've had an event, it rains and we get moved inside, which will be the case again this weekend. If we do get rain, we'll move it inside and play. But we're hopeful that we'll get good weather and be able to play. And that's another advantage of the new hard court is we can dry it a lot quicker. Once that clay soaked up water and started to puddle, it took a while to get it dry. But with the hard court, we have squeegees and blowers ready to go. So hopefully, if we do get some rain, they'll be short-lived and we can get that water off the court and be able to play.
So, Cam, I know when the floods happened, obviously, the golf courses took on tremendous damage. You had to cancel the Greenbrier Classic, and, that was a long rebuild process that you guys had to start. Were there any concerns about this tennis event coming up, because I know you said you had to redo the court, so were there any concerns that this was going to be done in time?
No, we always knew we were going to be able to get it completed in time, but it was obviously, if anybody has seen the pictures, the tennis facility had about 20 feet of water in it. It looked like a giant swimming pool after the flood. So there was definitely some work to be done. Luckily, there was no structural damage. All that needed to be done is we really clear out the water, and then it left a lot of mud and gunk behind that we had to clean out. But we got it cleaned out quickly, and then it was just the process of scraping off the old clay and putting down the new surface. And it was finished earlier this week, and the last couple of days we've been putting in the scoreboards and all that kind of stuff. So it's completely ready to go now. And we're really excited with the way it looks, and happy to hopefully have a big crowd come see it.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to see that new surface, because it is exactly like you mentioned what they use at the U.S. Open up in Flushing Meadows. Just curious, was there ever any point before the floods where there was some discussion about wanting to change the surface from that soft clay that the outdoor courts traditionally have been using?
Yeah, so we had talked a little bit about it, but this kind of just provided us with the perfect opportunity since we had to get rid of the surface anyway. But the thought process is, at first when we opened it up, we just wanted to kind of keep it uniform with the rest of our outdoor courts and have that hard true clay. But as we kind of got into more and more discussions with players, one of our major goals is to have some Davis Cup and Federation Cup events played at the Greenbrier, and the men, especially on the Davis Cup, really preferred the hard court. So that's where we first started thinking about the hard court. And then, so then when we had the opportunity, we decided to go ahead and do it. And another one of our major goals with that hard court is to try to get some players to come in and train during the hard court season, like right before the U.S. Open or sometime during that stretch when they're kind of looking for a place to train a little bit. We feel like we now have the perfect facility for them to come and train on the same surface that they'll be playing on. So hopefully we can get a couple of current players to come stop by and train, maybe put on an exhibition, and have even more events for our tennis fans.
So Cam, I was out there in, I believe it was early June, for that last exhibition between Andy Roddick and Pete Sampras, and unfortunately it did get moved inside because of the rain, but I have to say those facilities are absolutely gorgeous. And I know you guys had some musical acts and other things kind of planned along that grandstand there. What are some of the things that you guys have planned for extracurriculars for this event?
Not a whole lot in terms of music or anything. We'll have concessions and that type of things on that veranda there, but no music this time around. We're really kind of focusing on the tennis, and there's really not a whole lot of time for the music, and you have to worry about the weather when it comes to music. I think when we had Earth, Wind, and Fire to open it up, it poured the rain all night, and we don't really have a venue to move it inside like we can with the tennis. So we're not planning anything along those lines this time, but a day full of tennis on Saturday with 2 singles matches and then the doubles matches on Sunday. I think it's going to be plenty of action going on for people. Well,
we had a chance to speak with the 2 female competitors this weekend, Venus Williams and Madison Keys. It will be the first time female players have taken part in this Champions Tennis Classic. They say they're looking excited. How is it from the Greenbrier standpoint in terms of communication with them, especially this week, because the weekend is finally here? It's time. The planning is more or less already finished. It's time to get ready for the actual event.
Yeah, they're excited about the event just as we are. I think it's an opportunity for them to get out and play competitively like they do all the time, but also have a little fun with it. I think when they play these types of events, one of their major goals is to make sure the fans have a good time. So there's a little more talking to each other, a little fun-natured jabs at each other, and just making sure that the entertainment value is fun, and they enjoy that. Obviously they're competitive people, and they want to give their best when they get out there, but it's also fun when you compete as hard as they do to be able to kind of let your guard down a little bit and relax and just enjoy the game for probably the reason they got into it is just the love of tennis and the love of getting out there and playing. So they're excited, and we're excited. It's great to have the women involved, and obviously we have some of the biggest names in women's tennis, and especially in Venus Williams, who's an absolute legend in women's tennis. So it's a great way to start it off.
Absolutely. And so that last exhibition you guys have was very entertaining. Andy Roddick basically turned it into a comedy show. And we know John McEnroe is obviously he's very animated out there, likes to get into it. Who do you think has a better sense of humor compared to Roddick versus John McEnroe?
They're both great for sure. sure, but like you said, McEnroe knows that people come to see that show from him. I mean, that's what he's known for, and he makes sure he gives the people what they expect. But it's funny. I was talking to him about that a few years ago when he was here, and I said, how much of that is an act to get the fans into it, and how much of it is truly your passion coming out? And he said it usually starts as an act a little bit, but as the match moves on, he starts to feel those emotions. It gets a little angry at the line judges he always has, and then it becomes more real as it goes along. So you always can expect a show from John McEnroe for sure.
Absolutely. And so when we had that matchup last time, Roddick obviously just a few years removed from playing. He's still in pretty good shape. Sampras is a little bit older. Now you bring in McEnroe, who's been out of the game for quite some time. What kind of level of actual play are we going to see here? And you think that at some point these guys' competitive juices are going to take over and they're going to start really going after it?
Absolutely, and as you said, McEnroe's a little bit older, but he still plays a lot of tennis, and so his game's still in pretty good shape. Especially if you look for Sunday for the doubles match, McEnroe is one of the greatest doubles players to ever play the game, and I think you can play that doubles game at more of an advanced age better than you can the singles, because you don't have to move quite as fast. And so I think his doubles game is still really strong, but so is his singles. And yeah, I definitely feel like the competitive juices will come out. It'll be interesting to see how the hard court plays into that, because I think McEnroe was benefited from the clay a little bit because it slows things down a little bit. But now trying to return Sampras' serve on that hard court could get interesting.
So where does this go here? I mean, you guys have had a series of exhibition matches here over the last couple of years. What are your plans as far as continuing this moving forward? Are you guys hoping to someday have an actual pro event with guys who are still doing it?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned a minute ago, we're definitely looking at the Davis Cup and Federation Cup, and we'll actually bid for those events in 2017 and see what happens. So hopefully we can get some of those in, and we'll continue this as well, because we want, as we are with the women in this event, we want some of the current stars in, but we also want to continue to bring in the legends, because I think people appreciate seeing them as well. So we're gonna continue this Greenbrier Champions Tennis Classic each year, and then probably have a few other events around it each year as we have the last couple of years. And we're gonna try to continue to feature Pete Sampras, obviously, because he's our tennis professional emeritus at the Greenbrier, and we love having him around, and people love getting to see him. So he'll be a part of it, but just we're gonna continue to expand as we have this year, adding the women, and we'll see what ideas come up in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting. I have to ask, though, with Venus coming, has Serena said whether she will or will not be in attendance?
I wanted to ask the same thing.
I haven't heard anything about whether she's coming or not, but we obviously love to have her, but we're excited to have Venus too. I mean, she's a tremendous player, just as Serena is, and she's made a name for herself outside of the world of tennis too. So I think she's going to be meeting at some point while she's here with Carlton Barney, our interior decorator, and I think they'll be talking a little bit about things, and so it should be a good trip for her, and we're excited to have her. I know she's really excited about coming. She mentioned a member of her staff is a Greenbrier County native, and has been telling her what to expect when she gets here, and she's excited to see it. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to see. Maybe possible surprise Serena sighting there, but in either case, it's going to be some really good matchups here. It should be a really fun time. I know that you follow the Mountaineers very closely as well. I'm just curious, what are your impressions of that game against Youngstown State? Because I know defensive coordinator Tony Gibson, despite the win, he was very, very unhappy with how the defense played after that game.
Yeah, he was, and it wasn't a tremendous defensive effort by any means, but those games are so hard when you've matched up against the FCS opponents, because no matter how much the coaches preach and how much the players see on TV where other FCS schools pull off the upsets, it's still in the back of your mind. It's a little bit different playing Youngstown State than it is playing a Missouri or a team or a Big 12 team or BYU or whoever else is on West Virginia's schedule. So you always have to guard against that letdown. I think there was a little bit of that, but I think the positive news for West Virginia, first of all, is that they survived, because you do see teams that come in flat in those types of games and don't survive. And on top of that, they really put the pedal down in the second half. I think when they realized, hey, we've got to step it up here, they did that. Did what they needed to do, and I thought the effort was much better in the second half. So it hasn't been perfect, but through two games, I think the coaches have to be happy with what they've seen.
How much stock do you put into Skylar Howard's performance? 5 touchdown passes, his numbers look great, but again, against that FCS school. Do you give him a lot of credit for being able to kind of lead the team back and pull away in the second half?
I really do, and I've always been kind of a Skylar Howard supporter. I think he's taken a lot of heat from fans over the years that probably isn't deserved because, some of the struggles he's had, he has had some accuracy problems here and there, but some of the struggles he's had I think has been a result of, especially last year, a young receiving core and some struggles up front. And I think now that you're seeing some of those things get corrected, he's looking a whole lot better. What I like about Skylar is just how hard he competes all the time. And if you're around the team, you notice pretty quickly that they really believe in him, and he's a true leader on that team. And that's what you want out of your quarterback and have to have from a quarterback. So I think Skylar's going to have a big season, and I think what we've seen in these first 2 games is a good indication of what he's going to be able to do out there.
Yeah, I think so, especially with what we saw from when he got injured in the second quarter against Missouri. They had to bring in William Crest. He fumbles the football first play. They bring in Chris Chugunov. He throws an interception. If Skylar Howard is injured and has to miss a more significant amount of time than just a few plays at the end of a half, how much would that impact the amount of your offense? Because, Missouri, the defense was able to keep Missouri from capitalizing on those opportunities, but they may not have the same type of luck even against BYU, definitely against some of the tougher Big 12 teams.
Right. I think the jury's still out on the backup quarterbacks a little bit, but obviously if something happens to Skylar, it's going to be a big blow because I think he is playing so well right now, and like I mentioned a second ago, he is such a leader for that team. You really need to have him on the field. But, I think it's really hard to tell about those backups right now because that's a tough situation to be thrown in there like that, and a quick situation against an SEC opponent in a key situation of the game, trying to lead your team down the field. It's not easy to do. I think to really get a judge of those backups, you need to see them for a more extended period of time where they kind of get comfortable and get their feet under them a little bit and see what they can do. So I'm not ready to throw in the towel on those backups just yet, but it's definitely an issue worth keeping an eye on because right now, just based on the small sample size we have, West Virginia doesn't seem to have a good answer if Skylar Howard goes out.
Yeah, and given his injury in week 1, were you at all concerned about how much he was running in week 2? I think he had 8 carries, and they weren't all just get a few yards and slide down. He took a couple of hits on those plays.
Yeah, it was a little bit concerning. I think Dana Holgerson actually mentioned that after the game that he ran it more than he had intended to, but it's kind of a tough balance because you don't want to run him too much when he's already injured and make it worse. But then again, that's just kind of Skylar Howard's game. As I mentioned earlier, the competitiveness in it. If he sees an opportunity to take off and run, he's going to do it, and he's not really good at sliding down and getting out of the way. He likes to take the hits head on and get as many yards as he can, and you want to kind of caution your quarterback about that and try to keep him healthy, but you also don't want to take that juice away from him. So it's a tough balance, but I thought they did a good job for the most part of limiting him. Some of those runs were just broken plays. I don't think you can tell your quarterback not to take advantage of what's there. So I think he needs to learn how to take care of himself, but also that's part of what makes him who he is.
Work on those slides for sure.
Yeah, and looking ahead now, Mountaineers do have that bye week, just like they had this time last year. They got their first 2 games in, then they had their bye week, then their arguably the biggest non-conference game. I guess this year they have 2 big non-conference games with Missouri and BYU, but right now, how would you like the Mountaineers' chances against BYU? Because I know the Cougars are coming off a loss themselves. Are you anticipating a Mountaineers win in a couple weeks?
Yeah, I think it's a game they really need to win if they're going to be competitive in the Big 12 and reach their goals and maybe where they think they can get to. It's a game that they should win because they're going to be teams tougher than BYU in the Big 12 for sure. So I think they need to step up and find a way to win it. But I think, really when you look at the schedule when it first comes out, you think the off week is a little too early and you'd rather see it a little bit later. But I think with what you just mentioned with Howard, it might be actually coming at a good time because you want to get him fully healed up, and I think a week off, and they trust him being a senior. He knows what he's going to do, so they can give him a lot of this time and not work him a lot, but just let him rest and get those ribs healed up and ready to go. So I think that does come at a good time for the Mountaineers.
All right, Cam. Well, we really appreciate coming on to talk a little tennis with us, talk a little Mountaineers, and we'll be out there this weekend to come check out those matches between Venus Williams, Madison Keys, Pete Sampras, and John McEnroe. Some great talent there. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. We look forward to having you. Should be a great weekend.
All right.
Absolutely. Good talking to you, Cam. We'll see you later.
All right. Thanks.
All right. That is Cam Huffman, the Director of Sports Public Relations for the Greenbrier Resort. A lot of exciting things going on at the Greenbrier because don't think we mentioned that they also have a fall golf event. Very nice to see that still continuing even in the wake of the floods that really damaged a lot of the courses. The Greenbrier course, which you had a chance to see a couple months ago for the WV Amateur, that was one of the courses because it's kind of on a higher elevation that dodged most of the damage for the floods. But yeah, Greenbrier is it's the Greenbrier of old. The flood has not affected it as much as some other parts of southern West Virginia.
Yeah, and I mean, once that all went down, they got right after just renovating and trying to get everything back up to speed as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, there's no chance of saving the Greenbrier Classic, but it's great that we get to salvage it and have one last golf tournament here before the weather starts getting cold.
Yeah, absolutely. And great points he mentioned that we'll talk about more in our next segment. WVU football, again, it is their bye week. Like you mentioned, perfect chance in a way this year because of, how Skylar, did he act at all hurt when you saw him against Youngstown State?
Nothing visibly whatsoever. I mean, I think Cam alluded to it, he's a real tough kid, competitor, so he's not going to, unless he's really, really hurt, I don't think he's going to show any kind of signs of pain or weakness or anything like that. But it was a little concerning to see him take some of those hits because, they did call a couple of design QB runs, some draws, and he was, diving forward, fighting for extra yards. And while that's great, if you help your team pick up a first down, you lose your quarterback and it really hurts your team. So they got to be really careful with that. But they're in a good spot because they got the next 2 weeks now. They've got some things to work on. They need to let Skylar get rested up over these next 2 weeks, and the defense certainly has plenty that they will focus on. And I know Tony Gibson said that these next 2 weeks will be very challenging for them. I think there's going to be a lot of conditioning in their future.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break, continue discussion about the Mountaineers win when we return on the changeup. Also, more college football. Marshall is home this week again. Concord and Bluefield College are both back home this week, and Virginia Tech is back in Blacksburg. Hokies trying to bounce back from their loss in the battle at Bristol. We'll talk about all of that coming up, and we'll also talk high school football. It's already week 4 here in the Mountain State. That's coming up next. You're listening to The Changeup on WOAY Sports. Welcome back to the Changeup on WOAY Sports. Matt Digby, Tom Beal, as we continue our discussion on Mountaineer football. WVU 2-0, coming off a win this past Saturday over the Penguins of Youngstown State, a game that saw Bo Pelini in West Virginia, and from what I heard, he actually did have his moments on the sideline.
Yeah, I think he got a flag at one point in the fourth quarter. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. I was on the opposite sideline, so I couldn't, obviously hear what he was saying, but I think he got into some jawing with the refs a little bit, and some classic Bo Pelini stuff. Got flagged on the play, and by that point, the game was pretty much out of reach. But good win for the Mountaineers for sure. It's certainly a lot of things to work on, but you get out of there with the W. It's the most important thing.
It really was, because the FCS games are always such a trap for teams. We've seen it happen where, obviously, who can forget 9 years ago when Appalachian State went to the Big House and shocked Michigan. I know Virginia Tech has had their own FCS nightmares in the past, games against James Madison in particular. But again, we mentioned this at the start of the show. It was your first game in Morgantown, getting to see Milan Puskar Stadium up close. Great atmosphere. I know you mentioned not completely sold out. But
just a few corners in the upper decks.
Yeah.
For the most part, it was people tailgating beforehand. Obviously, great student turnout. Everyone just really really excited and enthusiastic, as they should be. At one point, though, because, I mean, you remember that Youngstown State held a 14-7 lead at one point in the second quarter. They scored a couple of touchdowns and took the lead, and WVU went like 3-and-out the next series, and there was actually some boos at that point.
I was going to ask you that,
A little bit of frustration with the offense at that point. And, the defense as well, but at that point it was directed kind of right at Skylar, and he responded very well to it. They got a touchdown before the half, and then he went out and got 3 more in the second half. And, I mean, some of these touchdowns, he threw some really, really good balls, corner of the end zone fades. He was connecting on pretty much all of his deep balls. I think just about every time he went deep, he was able to make the connection. A couple long touchdown to Karan White, another one to Shelton Gibson. I believe Gibson had 2 of the 5. Dakeil Shorts caught a touchdown, and they used Dakeil Shorts a lot over the middle. So that's something that's been working really well for them. Get him in the slot and kind of work him in the middle of the field. That's been a good kind of move the chains element for them.
How would you say they operated in the red zone? Because I know that was a big talking point in the win over Missouri, because they only got 1 touchdown on 5 red zone trips against the Tigers. How would you say they fared against the Penguins?
Pretty good for the most part. I don't know the exact numbers. I'd have to look those up. But they had 1 touchdown in the second half by Russell Shell that was actually called back due to a penalty, and then they ended up following that up with I believe it was the touchdown to Dakeil Shorts at that point. So they did come away with some points in the red zone. But, I mean, a lot of the touchdowns they didn't have to, because Skylar was hitting those deep balls, and those were going for touchdowns, so they didn't even have to worry about the red zone. But, yeah, I mean, for the most part, they had 1 field goal, so they were stopped 1 time. I think another field goal right before the first half was missed. So, for the most part, they were in position to score points every trip down.
Yeah, now looking forward, like we have mentioned several times, this is their off week. Obviously, a lot of stuff to correct, especially on defense. I remember hearing comments from Tony Gibson where he actually apologized to the fans for that performance. It obviously didn't turn out to hurt them too bad, but it was still something they could definitely work on.
Yeah, he was disappointed in himself, disappointed in the players, obviously very frustrated. He said that he was out-coached in that game. Besides just they gave up the second touchdown that put Youngstown State up top briefly was a big play. They threw a deep ball up, one-on-one coverage. The guy came down with it and then broke free and ran all the way. So those are the types of things that will drive a defensive coordinator crazy, those big, long touchdown plays. The other touchdown was a short drive, or a long drive that was capped off with a short run. I think the most concerning thing, though, is they didn't really get to the quarterback, and they got an interception late, but they weren't causing havoc in the backfield. They weren't blowing up a lot of plays, getting sacks, forcing turnovers. So those are things that you really need for your defense to be successful, and especially against a Youngstown State team, I think you would have expected them to do that a little bit more, and that's something they did not do. So I'm sure they'll be focusing their attention there.
So, that's going to be very interesting to see in a couple weeks when they take on BYU. One of the teams who is in action this week, the Marshall Thundering Herd. We had a chance to view a couple highlights from their win, a big-time win for the Marshall, although, granted, they came against an FCS team as well, 62-0 over Morgan State. I mean, not exactly the best type of measure, in all honesty, in terms of comparing where they are compared to other teams in the FBS, but from the few highlights you saw, they did look very impressive.
Yeah, Chase Litton was putting up those Will Fenton numbers, 6 touchdowns on 16 passes through the air, went over 300 yards. And the interesting thing was he really spread the ball around. I was looking at the numbers. No player had more than 3 catches or 58 yards, so it was a lot of just long plays and to all different guys. I think 4 or 5 guys caught those 6 touchdown passes. So that was encouraging to see. Obviously you take it with a grain of salt because it's against a Morgan State. But their offense, they're in good position. They had that bye week, so they're heading into the season. They're focused right now heading into week 2.
Yeah, and they're going to be in action at noon on Saturday, taking on the University of Akron Zips. That's a game you will be at, Tom. I can tell you, having been to a couple Marshall games last year, it's also a great environment, a great tailgate scene, and this Thundering Herd team is really going to be a team to watch in Conference USA. I think that's going to be a great game. Akron, I know, is the underdog. Marshall is definitely favored to win, but Akron, I can tell you from having seen Akron for many years, coming from Ohio University where they were in the same conference. They're in year 5 under Terry Bowden, and it's to the point where they've really started to turn the corner in terms of wanting to contend for the Mid-American Conference, but also they're in a position where they want to challenge those bigger names in college football like the Marshall. And
they did it last week against Wisconsin. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well for them. I think it was 54-0.
54-10, that's
right.
What, yeah.
Okay, so they did get some points on the board.
They did get points late in the game.
So, so they'll. That's why I think it'll be interesting, because anytime a team loses like that, they can respond in one of two ways. They can kind of shut it down and get down on themselves, and then their season's basically lost from that point forward, because they kind of just go through the season wishing for it to be over. Or they can respond in a positive way and pick themselves up by the bootstraps and say, this is not who we are, and be really motivated to come out and give Marshall a game. So it'll be interesting to see which of the two Zips teams comes up to play in Huntington on Saturday. I think obviously, Wisconsin is one of the better teams in college football, and they beat LSU the week before. So certainly nothing to hang your head about there, but player here likes losing by that much. So I think they'll be pretty motivated for Saturday.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's worth mentioning that Marshall may want to avoid looking at this as a trap game, because the following week they get to welcome Louisville to Huntington on the 24th. Louisville, I don't know how much you've seen of them, but they've had a great start to the year. Lamar Jackson has been absolutely brilliant, throwing his name in the Heisman discussion.
Yeah, well, I saw those numbers. It was something like 400 yards, another 200 on the ground, just all kinds of touchdowns. So that's a dynamic player that you got to keep your eye on. Marshall's certainly going to have their hands full with him. It'll be interesting to see how they match up head-to-head, but that could be a problem for them for sure.
I think so. Also home this weekend is the Virginia Tech Hokies, looking to bounce back from their loss in the Battle of Bristol to Tennessee, 45-24. Obviously, really what happened was that first play of the second quarter. They tried to downplay it as being the turning point, but the fact of the matter is they were up 14-0. Everything they did that first quarter against the Volunteers was successful. Then the very first play of the second quarter, Gerard Evans fumbles on the handoff, miscommunication. Tennessee recovers. They get first and goal. And the very first play of that drive, Josh Dobbs connects with Jawan Jennings for a touchdown, and that's all Volunteers from then on out.
Yeah, I mean, you would know better than I, but it seemed from looking at the box score and just the way the game unfolded that they kind of, once Tennessee kind of got rolling, Virginia Tech kind of fell apart. 24 unanswered points in that second quarter, and they lost 5 fumbles in the game. So, I mean, those are some very concerning statistics, Tennessee or not. What did you see from them kind of as that was all unraveling?
I mean, I just kind of saw them, panic for the most part. They were doing so well in the first quarter that they were kind of hoping the second quarter they could keep it going. And, I mean, who knows? We could always play the what-if game. If they don't fumble the very first play of the second quarter, who knows how that game turns out. If it's close, if Tennessee is able to forge a comeback. But, yeah, really, once that fumble happened, it was kind of the mood for everybody on the media sideline. We're thinking, okay, here now Tennessee's going to show up, make it a game, and we certainly didn't expect 24 straight points in the second quarter. Then they added another unanswered touchdown in the third quarter before Virginia Tech got points again. But it was a record-breaking crowd, I can tell you that. 156,990. It was
the exact number.
That was the exact. I made sure to get a shot when they actually announced the record on the scoreboard, so we could have that for the record.
So tell me about that atmosphere. I mean, that's like 2 full stadiums full of people. I mean, it must have just been absolutely wild. I mean, your ears must have got blown out by the second quarter.
It really was. It was a tremendous atmosphere. It really is one of those things where you see it on TV. That's one thing. But as I was driving over the one highway, the first time I saw it in person, I'm thinking, whoa. I mean, granted, I had to keep my eye on the road because I was driving, but it really was one of those things where you have to see it in person to believe it. And then once we actually got in the stadium and we take our way down to the field, was we go through one of those banks that you've seen on the actual racetrack. You don't realize how big those banks can be until you see it in person.
Yeah, so what did you think of the setup there? Because I've heard some criticisms maybe about, from a fan's perspective, having the track in between the field and kind of fans being very far away from play. Did you get a chance to go into the stands at all and kind of see it from their perspective? And just what did you think of the overall setup?
I wasn't able to see, well, when I'm walking in, I'm technically in the front row of one of the sections, so I kind of have that angle. I am not against it at all, in all honesty. I thoroughly enjoyed the setup. I know there are some critics about the sight lines, those up in the upper seats not having the best of view, especially in one area of the field where the media center, you have those two buildings. Granted, they're not exactly the tallest in terms of height, but they do have that ability to block the sideline. But I think that's what was so great, was that they were able to have the infield on such a low level and have the seats above it. So you have the crowd basically on top to a degree, and that kind of makes it easier in terms of sight lines. But I love the setup, though, in terms of, most of the stadium was in orange for Tennessee, not as many Virginia Tech fans, although the Hokies did make their presence known. But overall, it's a great atmosphere, and I'm definitely in favor of this continuing in the future. And I know Justin Fuente was very complimentary of the atmosphere. I know I wasn't there to hear it in person, but Butch Jones, the Tennessee coach, says it will never be duplicated, in the sense that the inaugural event will never be duplicated. I'm sure he wouldn't mind seeing
the
it
overall spectacle
happen again in the future. Yeah.
Do you think that the size of the crowd maybe had an impact on Virginia Tech as they went along? Because, mostly Tennessee fans there, and when you have a crowd of that magnitude, do you think it kind of got to them mentally a little bit?
I think so, especially once Tennessee got that first touchdown. I know Virginia Tech was asked this question, and they downplayed it, saying, the crowd wasn't as big of an impact. But I think the fact of the matter is, once that first touchdown happened for Tennessee, then the next drive, they marched down the field, score a touchdown, and then they continued to force those turnovers, convert them into points. I think that did play a role, because Virginia Tech fans, they didn't all start leaving en masse until fairly late in the game, but you could kind of see when they were aware the writing was on the wall. They tried to get out and beat the traffic.
156,000 people, you can't blame them for going to jump on that traffic. It must have been very interesting for you on the way back there. It must have taken you quite some time.
Oh, my goodness. We were aware it was going to take a while with traffic, so when we were going through all the post-game motions, I was doing my stand-ups for the packages that you saw in there. I was trying to be aware that, I'm not exactly in a time rush, because I'm not exactly in a hurry to wait in traffic. And even then, when we had finished everything and we got back to our car, I'd say it was around 1:30, 1:45. There was still a long line. It was a good half hour before we were able to pull out of our parking spot.
Wow, that must have been quite the event there. I know it's like when you go to a Patriots game up in Massachusetts, it takes a couple hours to get out of that stadium, and that's only about 70,000 people. So 156,000, I can only imagine.
Yeah, but it was a great experience. I definitely would be in favor of seeing it happen again. I know one reason it took such a long time for it to happen was because the folks in Tennessee kind of dragged their feet. They weren't enthusiastic about the fact that the largest crowd involving the Tennessee Volunteers would be away from Neyland Stadium, where the Volunteers usually play their home game. So that was kind of the reason.
How far is that distance between Bristol Motor Speedway and Neyland Stadium?
They are exactly roughly 2 hours from Knoxville, and Bristol's 2 hours from Blacksburg. So you talk about the perfect neutral setting. Bristol, we actually got to drive through the city on the way back. It has that sign where half of it is in the state of Virginia, half of it is in the state of Tennessee. So the state line goes through it. The actual speedway is further more on the Tennessee side, but still, you talk about an absolute perfect neutral setting to have this kind of matchup. And both teams can definitely be proud to be part of college football history.
Certainly, and if you're Virginia Tech, be happy that you get to move on and face BC next week. That's a much-needed break for them.
Yeah, they're going to be taking on Boston College this week. First ACC game for the Hokies. A little fun note, it was the very last game last year that the Hokies played before Frank Beamer announced his retirement, because remember, Beamer waited until November to announce his retirement, even though they still had several games left in their schedule, not including the Independence Bowl win over Tulsa, but they were able to get the win at BC. We are expecting a Hokie win to get to 2-1, and then they welcome East Carolina, a game that you'll be at on the 24th.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think a win for BC there, and then East Carolina should be a great game. I'm looking forward to that one. All right, you want to talk some high school football?
Absolutely. Let's get into high school football. It's week 4. A lot of great matchups. Our Northside Chevy Game of the Week featuring those two teams. Independence visiting Shady Spring, a longtime Raleigh County rivalry, especially more so now that Shady Spring is now in Class AA along with the Patriots. So that's going to be a great matchup. But first off, let's talk about the 3-0 teams we've seen, because Fayetteville has done very well to start the season, just like they did last year. Granted, last year didn't end so well for the Pirates, but they are 3-0 again this year. Nicholas County, who actually plays on Thursday night against Roane County up in Summersville, they also have had a great start, and we've been able to see a couple with the Grizzlies.
Yeah, they've been putting the points on the board offensively, and I don't know. This is my first year here, so I don't know how this compares to what we saw from them last year. But they've been one of the teams that's impressed so far. Independence has been pretty impressive. I know they lost last week, but they've looked good so far. Even Midland Trail at 2-1, they've been good. And with Fayetteville, I mean, you can't say enough about that offense. I mean, they have such a small roster there. I think only 23 or 24 guys in the program, but they come out and they put points on the board every week. And it seems like we're getting highlight plays from them every single week. As far as Will Fenton, he's been spreading the ball around a lot. Likes Dalton Dempsey a lot, though. He's been hitting him. I think he's got at least one touchdown every game. What's his name? Marcus Lively,
yep.
Alex Hewitt. They've also been getting involved. So, I mean, they've got a potent offense there in single A. They're a force to be reckoned with. Yeah,
and especially so because last year they kind of had the complementary running back tandem with you had a very talented senior running back in Troy Farrell, but now he's graduated. So now it's a lot of Fenton and Dempsey. And in addition, like you mentioned, Marcus Lively and Alex Hewitt. But I don't know if you've seen this, Tom, but the WVSSAC has released their first rankings, official rankings, in terms of this will be where the top 16 after Week 11 will make the playoffs. And we have quite a couple teams. AAA Greenbrier East is 7th right now. Princeton tied for 13th, and the Tigers themselves also doing very well. They are coming off a loss to number 1 Martinsburg, I should mention. It's
a tough one for them.
It's always a tough ask against the number 1 team in state in any class, but we do have a number 1 team in the area here in James Monroe, the Mavericks. We got to see a bit of them last week against Independence. They are number 1 in Class AA, and they certainly have earned that ranking.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing them in person. I personally haven't gotten to yet, but they've been very impressive so far. And we saw Week 1, we saw Independence come out and kind of just run all over Midland Trail, and it looked like to me they were going to be a powerhouse team. And James Monroe, they showed up against them, and they looked like a very, very good team against a very good opponent. So they're certainly going to be a team to be reckoned with throughout the season. I think Princeton will bounce back from that loss. 60-0 always looks real bad on a scoreboard, and it can be a little demoralizing when you travel all the way up to Martinsburg to get beat that way. But they're a good team. We saw it in the first 2 weeks down in this area, and hopefully kind of similar to who's the other team who lost big, and kind of Akron Zips, who I was talking about earlier.
That's right.
If Princeton's able to bounce back and use that as kind of motivation to do so, I think they'll be in great shape moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah. 3 area teams are right now in the top 16 in Class AA. Of course, James Monroe number 1, Nicholas County's 10th, and Westside is also in the top 16. You've gotten to see Westside in their Week 1 win at Liberty. They followed that up with a Week 2 win over Wyoming East, and then they did struggle losing to Man last week, but this week they get to take on a Tulsa team that did very well last year. They're traditionally a bit one of the tougher teams in the state of West Virginia in Class AA, kind of the more underrated teams as well, but Westside is also off to a great start as well.
Yeah, they're off to a great start. One of the challenging things about AA is, with the reclassification, there's a lot more teams in that division this year, and so I think that you're going to see a lot of these guys kind of beat up on each other, and a team like Westside, they really need to make sure that they get their wins where they can, because, you lose a tough game to a team like Man, and, you don't want to make it 2 in a row and fall down to 2-2 and then let some other team kind of come up and sneak in front of you. So I think they have a very talented roster, and if they can get those wins early and kind of get themselves out in front of the pack, they'll be in great shape for the playoffs.
Yeah, and then over in Class Single A, Fayetteville, we mentioned they're 3-0. They are number 6 in the rankings. Number 2, Summers County, which we were expecting them to have a fairly good season, but they've done very well. They had the big win at Pikeview, then they had their bye week in week 2, but I was able to see them against Shady Spring this past weekend, and they performed very well against the Tigers.
Yeah, so they put up, was it 55 points?
55 points.
So that's pretty impressive considering, they lost Matt Ryan last year, who was kind of their do-it-all guy. He's able to, score in all kinds of different ways. So you got to check them out. How are they getting it done on offense now without Matt?
Yeah, they have a very talented quarterback in Nathan Grimmett, and he's able to spread the ball around very well. He had several different receivers being used as primary targets throughout that evening against the Tigers. But I think it's really going to come down to, much like the success the past few years for the Bobcats, it's come down to Matt Ryan. I think Nathan Grimmett is definitely worthy of being mentioned in our Player of the Year conversation, because I know we already have a couple favorites, Zach Stanifer, Will Fenton. I think we could put Nathan Grimmett in that conversation as well.
Is he a senior?
He is a senior quarterback, yes.
All right, so he's going to have to make that push this year, but they're off to a good start. It's been impressive.
They really are. So a lot of great high school action coming up. I know Fayetteville will be back at the home for their very first home game of the season. It's hard to imagine. They've opened up 3 games on the road. Now they're home. They're taking on Meadowbridge, a team that has struggled so far this year. I know you got to see them a bit against Tug Valley, and they're trying to stay positive, but it's got to be tough, especially with the kind of the pressure on them with Larry McClintock retiring, with trying to keep that playoff streak alive.
Yeah, it's very tough for new coach Dwayne Reichert. I mean, he's stepping into some very big shoes to fill, and they lost, a lot of good players from last season. Shane Harless, the running back, and a couple guys off of their offensive line. So it's tough to really expect them to maintain what they've been doing the last 7 years now. 6 or 7 years they've been in the playoffs now. So you start off, with this record, it's going to be difficult for them to bounce back into it. But hopefully they can string a few wins together and, make this a respectable season and build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Their goal is they definitely want to make the playoffs. 7-3 right now would, in my opinion, at least be good enough to get back into the single A playoffs. And if Meadowbridge can really turn the corner, starting with perhaps upset win at Fayetteville, that could really lay the foundation to kind of turn the season around and keep that streak going. But great high school game set up. Again, our Northside Chevy game of the week will be Independence at Shady Spring. Fayetteville will be home against Meadowbridge. Oak Hill, by the way, will be on the road at Wayne. Red Devils looking for their first win after tough losses to Liberty and to Mount View to open the season for them. But moving on now to, let's talk some Major League Baseball, because you've seen the Pirates. You just don't know when they're going to turn the page and put all their struggles behind them, because Tuesday they got the win to break a fairly lengthy losing streak, and then they come back on Wednesday and lose again to the Phillies, and I think this might be it for them.
Well, yeah, I haven't checked in a little while, because my understanding was they'd pretty much fallen out of the wild card, but last time I thought that they fell back to 3.5, 4 games out, and then they came right back up to to the forefront of that second wild card spot. So do you know what the games back are at this point?
Last I heard, they were 6 back of that second wild card spot, and there are only 3 weeks left in the regular season.
Yeah, at this point, that's a pretty tough gap to surmount, I would say. But I mean, they gave it a good run. You consider the fact that they traded away Mark Melanson at the deadline. Mm-hmm. One of the best closers in baseball, and they sent him over to a contender. So it really looked like they were shaping up for the rebuild mode. But Ivan Nova came over from the Yankees. He's pitched outstanding for them. He's been great, and they've been trying to get it done with a lot of really young starters. A lot of guys making spot starts. A lot of guys making their first several starts in the major leagues, and that's always a tough thing to do, especially when you don't have the stability at the top of the rotation. Nova's been great, but Ryan Bogasong came back from an injury. He's been a bit erratic this year. Garrett Cole came back from the DL and had a really bad start, and then immediately went back to the DL. He got hurt again. So it's tough to really play consistently good baseball when you don't have that consistency in your starting rotation.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the American League, the Boston Red Sox have, last I saw, they were still, a couple games behind the Blue Jays for the lead in the AL East, but they've since overtaken Toronto.
They did overtake Toronto. They unfortunately lost, I believe, the first 2 games of the Orioles series. I know they lost last night. It was a 1-0 game. Rick Porcello, who I don't think he had lost all year at Fenway, is a 20-game winner, which has been a real nice surprise for the Red Sox. But he lost last night in a 1-0 game, pitched 8 innings, and allowed just a solo shot to Mark Trumbo. So that's always a tough break, especially when you have the best offense in baseball and they can't give you any support at home. And they really need a win. And, they needed the win last night because now that lead is down to just 1 game over the Orioles in second place. You got the Blue Jays 2.5 back, and the Yankees, another team that was selling at the deadline. They traded away all their bullpen help for, prospects and guys down the road. They're still winning games, and they're creeping up. They're 4 back in the American League East. So it's a real dogfight in there, and it's so important to get these wins this time of year, especially against division rivals. So the Red Sox need to try to salvage that. They got this Orioles series, and then they got a weekend series with the Yankees. So this could major implications for the AL East playoff picture here this weekend.
Absolutely, and I know I'm keeping an eye just for sentimental reasons because of the Indians and the Cubs, how well they've been doing.
Yep.
But I know you probably wouldn't prefer to see an Indians-Cubs World Series. I know you'd rather see the Red Sox
I'd love to see a Red Sox
the American
Cubs World
League.
Series. That would be a classic.
That would be fun as well.
I
think in any case, if only because the Red Sox have had success the past few years, winning 3 World Series titles since 2004. If the curse of the Bambino was still alive, I would so absolutely be on board for a Red Sox-Cubs World Series. But as it stands, I think as long as one of those two, Indians-Cubs or Red Sox-Cubs, I think you can't be too disappointed, baseball neutrals.
I think that's how it'll end up shaking out when it comes to, I'm assuming that the Red Sox get in. I don't see any of those other teams, Orioles, Blue Jays, making a deep playoff run if they do get in. And one of them will probably be in the wild card spot. I know Detroit's creeping up on that second spot, but it'll probably be either the Blue Jays or the Orioles. The Indians are probably the best team in the American League right now, and they've just shown it with their pitching. They've got a real good, consistent lineup top to bottom. And the Rangers are good. I just don't see them as a team that has that depth to really make a deep postseason run. So it'll probably be the Red Sox or the Indians in the World Series.
Absolutely. So Major League Baseball regular season coming to a close. NFL regular season, meanwhile, just starting.
Getting going,
pretty good week 1. A couple games I was able to keep tabs on. The Bengals getting a come-from-behind win at the Jets. Another game I was spent a lot of time watching, that thrilling ending to the Seahawks and the Dolphins. And I know the 2 Monday night games maybe didn't exactly live up to the hype in terms of excitement.
No.
Steelers getting the big win over, as you like to call them, Washington's professional football team.
Yes.
And then the Rams 49ers game. Just curious, what would you say was the biggest takeaway from that Rams 49ers game?
I watched bits and pieces of it, but my biggest takeaway is that those are both really bad football teams. Blaine Gabbert, he did some nice things, picking up first downs on the run and things like that. But let's not get it twisted. Blaine Gabbert is not an elite. He's not even really a starting quarterback quality. But the Rams looked really, really bad. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you watched any of Hard Knocks, but I checked out Hard Knocks, and I just don't get the impression that Jeff Fisher is a very good coach. He's been around the league for a long, long time, and that's despite a lot of mediocre seasons. And I think that just what I saw from a team discipline standpoint, there were several things during Hard Knocks throughout their training camp that, as a Patriots fan, it just baffled me because the things that Bill Belichick would never allow to happen on his watch. So the Rams, they have that outstanding defense, but Case Keenum, not a starting quality quarterback. Their offensive line isn't good, which is a major problem because they have one of the best young running backs in the game in Todd Gurley, and they need to keep him healthy and really give him a chance to shine. And they can't do that. They're not going to go anywhere. And so that's why I think Jeff Fisher might be one of the first coaches we see fired this year.
Yeah, and I remember watching the bit of the Rams 49ers game. I was not too impressed, except for the one play where the one fan rushed the field. And I don't know if you've heard this, but Kevin Harlan,
Yes.
who was calling the game on the national radio feed, did a great job play-by-play. And his colleague, I'm trying to remember who his colleague was on that call, said that's the most exciting thing that's happened this game because that's the truth of the matter.
Well, that's spot on, and Kevin Harlan's obviously one of the best in the game, but that says it all right there. When a drunk fan running on the field is the most exciting moment, it's not great. And I think ESPN was probably hoping for a little bit of a better matchup there, two West Coast rivals, LA's, first time back in the LA Rams since '95 or whatever. So I think they were they were hoping for a much better matchup. But those are two teams that have tremendous struggles, especially on offense.
Absolutely. I know really the one game I'm going to be keeping an eye on with the NFL, just because of the whole sentimental factor, is the Rams' first game in Los Angeles since that whole relocation many years ago. But apart from that, what else do you see on the docket in terms of excitement NFL game-wise?
Well, next Sunday night we have the Packers and Vikings, and they're going to be playing in that brand new Minnesota stadium. I don't know if you've seen some pictures of that. That stadium
I haven't seen photos, but I have heard of it. Yeah.
It looks absolutely gorgeous. So I'm really excited to see that. I know NBC is going to be dialing up all kinds of cool aerial shots for that one, so I'm looking forward to that game as well. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be the Monday night game, Bears, Eagles. That doesn't really do too much for me. But
yeah, it probably did about 10 years ago, I remember, but not so much this year.
The other one I'm looking forward to see is the Colts-Broncos. I believe it's a 4:30 matchup, but that should be a pretty good game. I think the Broncos will probably come away in that game. I don't have a lot of faith in the Colts this year. I know a lot of people think that what happened last year was just kind of a fluke, Luck getting hurt and all that, but the way they run their offense is they run a lot of deep, dig type routes down the field, and that requires a lot of time for those, routes to develop. So Andrew Luck needs time in the pocket, and their offensive line is a real big question mark. They have a lot of issues there. So because of that, they have difficulty establishing the run with Frank Gore, who's an older running back at this point in his career. And if Luck can't have that time, he's probably going to get injured again, or at the very least, he's going to get sacked a lot. And that's not something you want from your starting quarterback. On the flip side, their defense has a lot of problems too. So they're a team that they gave up a lot of points to the Lions last week. I think the Lions have a good offense, but still, they have a lot of holes to shore up. So we'll see how they look against the Broncos offense that certainly won't be as prolific. Demaryius Thomas may not play in that game. Trevor Siemian looked pretty decent against Carolina last week, but we'll see how he performs as he's tested more down the season. But I think that's going to be a pretty good matchup, and I think the Broncos will probably come through. Yeah,
that was one of the games I was also able to keep an eye on, that ending, especially between the Colts and the Lions, where the Colts defense, like you mentioned, they had an opportunity to stop the Lions but the Lions just marched down. I think they were able to get the entire drive inside that 2-minute warning and then set up Matt Prater for the winning field goal. So it's going to be a very interesting scenario if the Colts cannot get the win. But final thoughts, again, college football, you'll be at Marshall-Akron.
Yes.
You think the Thundering Herd get to 2-0?
Yeah, I think they probably do. I mean, the offense looks great. Akron's coming off a tough loss, and, Marshall's got that home field advantage. So I think the fans are going to be fired up. It's going to be a good game, and I think Marshall will come through. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll have coverage of that game coming up this weekend. I'll be at the both Concord taking on Urbana. Mountain Lions looking to bounce back from a loss to Fairmont State. And then Bluefield College, they're still looking for their first win. They're taking on a ranked Lindsey Wilson team in the NAIA. That's kind of the big drawback for Bluefield College, that the conference they're in is so deep, so many ranked teams in the NAIA, that it's always a challenge in any conference, any level of college football. But that will wrap it up for this edition of The Change-Up. Tom Beal, as always, great talking local sports.
Oh, I love it, man. It's great. Looking forward to a lot of great football action and some tennis this weekend, too. So we got some good stuff to look forward to.
That's right, yeah. Our thanks to Cam Huffman for joining us on The Change-Up today. Again, the Greenbrier Champions Tennis Classic happening this weekend, featuring John McEnroe, Pete Sampras, Venus Williams, and Madison Keys. Tom and I will both be there several times throughout the weekend, so be sure to stop by, say hi, let us know what you think of the podcast online and on social media. We are at SportsWOAY, or you can follow us on our own Twitter pages. I'm at DigbyMatt. He's at Tom Beal, WOAY. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next week. This has been The Change-Up on WOAY Sports.